Hello, innovators. I'm Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator. Today I'm talking with Eleonora Moratto, the biology ballerina in STEM, plant biologist, a ballet dancer, and she has very long hair, an art history lover, enjoys historical fashion and historical dancing. Thank you for joining me on the Polymath podcast.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me, Dustin.
Yeah. Well, this is a show by PolyInnovator, so please just say hello to the innovators in the audience who are listening in.
Hello, everybody. Well, I think I already got a pretty good introduction, so I don't know.
We'll
Don't
dig
have
into all of
much.
it too.
Yeah.
I will say the one thing I like to do to break the ice, which is sometimes nerve-wracking for people, but when you do this kind of question, it makes everything else easier. So I'll get it started with it. Share something about yourself that no one knows about you.
Oh gosh. I guess this little parrot here, I called him Reginaldo because I like to give names to my, well, pictures. It's actually a wallpaper, so and also my houseplants have names. It's something that I enjoy to do, give them a bit of personality.
Well, they say when you talk to plants or even sing to plants, it makes them happier, and maybe you can explain that to us too if you want. But I think it's an interesting concept. That's good.
Well, I don't name my lab plants, but my house plants, yes, because I consider them more like pets.
You gotta cultivate their growth and whatnot, and I think naming stuff is always a nice way of personalizing things too.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Hello and welcome to the Polymath Polycast. And so, what was your mindset 5 years ago, and how have you changed since then?
It's quite hard to define. So mindset is a big word. I'd say the biggest thing that changed in the last more like 7 years rather than five is the fact that I went from like a non-scientist to a scientist. I think that is something that I've heard from other people that also went through like a research-based university. It really changes the way you process information. So essentially, the way you start looking at problems like a scientist. So you start looking into the information being it literally your work data or being it more like your everyday information that you need to just do your daily tasks. You approach this more with a more rational and more like scientific method. That is definitely something that has changed like in the grand scheme of how I process things. I don't think there is much. Surely, like I moved countries. I did a lot in the past 7 years, and I went probably from a teenager to a young adult.
Yeah.
So obviously, like it's difficult to say because like your mindset changes continuously. So there are definitely things I do and think differently, like compared to last year, compared to last month, and compared to yesterday. Like we learn every day,
So
we
quickly,
change every
yeah.
day. So in 5 years, things might be very, very different.
Yeah. Well, Eleonora, I think it's interesting too because that balance between art and science is always very dynamic where depending on which way you're coming from as well, you have to start expanding your mind in order to become more artistic. But you also have to start defining certain aspects and like trying to break things down when you get to more scientific, as you know. And it's interesting too because when you start approaching some creative problems scientifically, it can both help your creativity but also hinder it. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, of course. It's a bit. So what I like about ballet and biology, especially like I work in research essentially as my PhD, so I'm more of a researcher. Is that it is both very dynamic environments. They change continuously. There is no day is the same. Like I mean, in ballet, one day your center of gravity doesn't seem to quite want to be in the right place, so you need to approach your pirouettes in a certain way, and another day the next day you need to approach it in a different way. Uh, and there's obviously a constant learning curve. And in science, the same. One day you might have one issue to solve, one day you might have a different one, or your experiment, or you find out that something is slightly different from what you expected, and you need to readjust your research. It is hard to say. It is for sure. Sometimes you need to leave that science mindset behind for art to actually take over, especially because it can be sometimes very rational and very sort of keeping things in maybe little boxes. But on the other hand, the overall sort of being in constant learning and in constant like change, I think is something that is really true of both. Like it's hard
Yeah.
to, it's really something that you need for both things to just keep adapting to your environment.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure if someone listening in is only in one particular pool than the other, it might be hard for them to understand the balance between them, the Venn diagram, so to speak. But I think you've mentioned that the breaking into little boxes distribution is more of a scientific kind of idea. It's more of a systems idea. But I think that creatives, artists who can actually have that systems, have those systems in their life, they actually can increase their output and do more creative endeavors because they have a more scientific approach. And the scientists can have a more innovative and more creative process to it, and that would find new ideas because of that artistic mind.
Oh, absolutely. Like the two things are one in reality. I don't really like to say, oh, these are two different things, two different mindsets. Sure, there are differences, but like in the end, you really do sort of see more the similarities than the differences, especially if you dabbled in both fields.
Yeah.
Like even just if you're a scientist and you just draw for fun, or if you were an artist and you just like to read about research, there is so much cross contamination, cross reference. They are really inseparable. And especially if you think of like those art movements that say they're inspired by nature. I mean, science is also the study of nature. So are we looking at the same thing in different ways, really? Even like, I don't know, portraiture looks at human nature in a way, and psychology looks at human nature in a different way. And one is an art and one is a science. But I mean, just to touch upon two things that I really do not know much about.
Yeah.
So there are more connections, I think, and sometimes there are art movements that do work on sort of breaking down reality into boxes. If you think of Cubism, the same way that so like Picasso breaks the shapes, or there is I can't really think now of the name, but there is another post-impressionistic movement that also breaks things into shapes. And that it can be similar to like breaking down a molecular pathway, trying to understand every single step of a molecular pathway. So you get both worlds in both worlds, really.
Yeah. Well, you're speaking my language here, and I think the cross section of those areas is perfect for this show. And so, yeah, feel free to go nerdy on that if you'd like. I think it's interesting, too, because the path of science is more of the how, and the path of art, it's more of the why. But they're looking at the same question, just in different lens. And eventually, as you're saying there, too, those two different lenses that we think are different start to really kind of merge together into the same one. And I think it's really interesting. Some of the greatest artists, too, are the ones who combine both, like Da Vinci and Van Gogh and people else of those nature, which we might touch on later too. But
yeah, for sure. I mean, there is just. I'm not trying to say that they are the same thing. They are clearly different things, and specializing in one or the other. It's like, obviously, if you don't, if you didn't do all the studies to be a scientist, you cannot really be a scientist. In like, especially in this historical moment in which like we have enough knowledge to really require deep study of a subject to become an expert. Obviously, maybe before we had all this body of knowledge, you could sort of contain the body of knowledge within the experience of one person. Now you can't really. So you, of course, if you sort of choose one or the other pathway, you need to go through a certain amount of like studying and experience, depending on obviously on the subject, to like become, I want to say professional, like to use it and do it as a profession. But certainly, like if you think of it philosophically, they are not that far.
yeah, I like how the more we dig into it too, the more clear it becomes. And it's interesting too because you're mentioning the level of knowledge needed, and that's true. Like in order to do multiple things in life, in order to be polymathic or generalist, you have to have a certain level of knowledge in those areas to really make a difference. And it's interesting how a lot of people think that if you diverge your knowledge into more than two areas or more than three areas, you start to become more of a jack of all trades level, which is more novice or kind of basic. But in actuality, the cross-disciplinary knowledge that you get between both of them, the interdisciplinary innovations you can find, as well as just the translating of knowledge. So if you know one area really well, you can sort of translate it into another. Like, I know swimming really well. I've taught it for nearly a decade. I can take that swimming knowledge and translate it to something else, especially in the fitness realm, which will help me learn that quicker. So I think that's interesting too.
Yes, for sure. I mean, I think there is probably a point at which, like, especially, I mean, obviously, I come from an academic world. Like, I am now pursuing my PhD, so you can't really call yourself a scientist if you're not, if you don't have like, I mean, well, that's not like, I mean, you can't really do more than a certain level of research if you don't have at least a master's degree in that field. So there is society has tried, the human society has tried to define certain levels of knowledge that you need, and there are surely different levels of things that you can do. It's hard to say. It's hard to draw the line. So, for instance, in my case, I consider myself like I pursue science, plant biology professionally, and I pursue ballet very close to professionally, or I have done it professionally, depending on the stage of my life. I surely do. I surely enjoy most of the other things more for fun, because I realize that I don't have the time or to pursue them at a high level enough to be a professional. But who knows? Maybe when I'm 60, I'll retire and then get a degree in something else. I don't know. Maybe art history.
And I will say too, people often underestimate what they can do in a year, but overestimate. Oh no, they overestimate what they can do in a year, but underestimate what they can do in 10 years. And so you said 60 years old, but that's still another like 40 years ahead of you there. And so perhaps in the next 5 years, you'll come up with another thing that you want to pursue deeply, or maybe 10, maybe 15. Doesn't really matter. But I think a lot of people underestimate how much they can get done in a life. And I've noticed that a lot of people who've worked for one company, they always say, like, work for one company your whole life, you'll be set. At least in the US is how they always say, the American dream kind of thing. And it's ridiculous. But point is, like, they'll work for one company, and they'll work for multiple positions in that company. They'll go entry level, middle level, pivot again, maybe C-level executive, something like that. And each one of those areas is its own specialty, usually. They might be somewhat related, but managerial is way different than working that entry-level position. And so you actually learn more skills, you become more polymathic over your career anyways. And so for someone like you who's already trying to go for that cross-disciplinary action, I think it will happen quicker too.
Yes, for sure. I mean, it's this sort of set of mind that once you're done with sort of your early years are for learning, and then your later years are for working, let's say. I don't really believe in that. It's definitely like life is a constant learning environment, whether you are sitting at a desk reading a book or not. I argue that I learned a lot in just by doing things. Like I mean, my degree was amazing, but like my master's degree, when I really got in the lab, it really opened a world that maybe sometimes you don't necessarily realize as much. So many skills, so much more that you can gain than just by reading the research done by somebody else.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, when I was researching you, I had opened a couple of your newest research papers you had helped on, like the dynamic accumulation of the helper NLR at the plant pathogen interface underpins pathogen recognition. And I was reading through it, and I was like, okay, I understand some of these words. And it's one of those things where, even though I don't understand it fully, I can still learn a lot about just from reading it, and understand, like, learning that I don't know enough is a very important learning as well, because that way I know I need to improve in this area. That's one reason why too I'll be really excited to talk to you, because something you say will stick with me or someone listening in, and we'll be able to learn more about plant science or more about ballet. And I thought that was really cool.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
Exciting. What brought you to plant biology, by the way?
So, as being sort of polymathic, it was very hard to sort of pick a lane, because at a certain point, if you want to pursue something, and you have so many interests. So in Italy, the school system, so we are in high school till 19. And how the way the school system works is that we pursue 11 subjects throughout to the age of 19. So, and that includes, like in my case, it was Latin, philosophy, history, Italian, several languages, and then maths, physics, biology. So it was, for me, up to the last point, it was really hard to say, okay, what do I want to do?
Yeah.
I realized that I really enjoyed biology as a subject towards the end of high school. I was good at all of them, but biology was just, it had the best of both worlds. It had the science, but it also had that sort of maybe more compilation style knowledge that like more classical subjects are known for. So I went down the route of biology, and then as soon as I got to university here in London, I started to get some lectures about plant sciences and about how plants work and how plants evolved, and it just really sparked something.
Yeah.
Something that, for instance, really fascinated me is something that everybody knows, but we never think about it this way, is that, so for instance, plants grow new leaves continuously, right? Which, yeah, I mean, duh, right?
Yeah.
But it's the same process as if a human were to grow a new hand. It's post-embryonic development. So humans, mammals develop as an embryo, and then what they can do after is they just grow. They don't develop necessarily new structures. Obviously, there are exceptions. It's a bit more complicated than this, but plants will have an embryonic development in which they sprout the root, they sprout the two first leaves, which are called cotyledons, depending on the type of plants. And then what they do is they have two stem cell niches, one at the top between the two leaves and one at the bottom at the tip of the root. And those stem cell niches can give rise to other organs. So a new leaf is a new organ, a new root is a new organ, and you have the possibility to manipulate their cell identity a lot more than we can do. And this was really striking to me. And then the way that plants colonized land, and how initially it was fungi, and then it was lichens, right? So plants and fungi together one was photosynthesized and one was saprotrophic. So there was a connection and there was an exchange of nutrients. Really geeking out right now, but these
Yeah, that's
things
good.
I thought were really, really interesting, and somehow like something that you always see, because we all know what a plant is, we all look at it, but like it's really not, as we don't maybe think as deeply about how cool plants really
Yeah.
are, and how much that little thing that seems to be just sitting there is actually doing, and what it can do.
Well, and it's interesting too. I always try to prepare myself at least a little bit before coming in on the interview, and I was watching a lot of plant science videos, including Crash Course, which talks about like the history of plants and like how the first plants started out, and the plants in the Jurassic period, for example, just over the years how they evolved and the different evolution of it. It was just interesting how at one point we had such a dense forest. We don't even know what it looks like because it was so old and we don't have enough records of it, but like the extremely dense forest of just new kinds, the first kinds of trees, so to speak. And it's just a fascinating concept. Like the plants are so prevalent on our planet, and yet we just kind of ignore them. Sometimes I'll look at a flower and I'll just sit there and enjoy the beauty of it or take a picture of it. I notice on your Instagram too, you do that too. Like you do it way more than I do, but
I do that a lot, yes.
yeah. But one of my first pictures that was really important to me was like this one plant or flower that grew between two pieces of concrete. And I was like, the resilience of that plant, I decided, no, screw the man-made stuff. We're going to keep growing anyways. Or like, I play video games a lot, and a lot of post-apocalyptic games will depict cities being overrun by plants, because as soon as we leave, the plants will take over. I think that's a beautiful kind of saying, too.
Yeah, and you're talking about this really romantic almost concept that they had in the 18, I think it was at the beginning of the mid 18th century, when they started rediscovering Pompeii, and like Roman, like archaeology was somewhat well, not modern archaeology, but like part of archaeology was born at that time, and it became fashionable. And even later in the UK, the Victorian sort of aesthetic, they had this, they loved having ruins, fake ruins in their gardens overrun by plants. They just really liked this idea. And I think we still do, because I know that there are temples, I think in Indonesia, I've never been actually, but I'd love to go there. There are these beautiful cities and temples that are overrun by plants, and that must be beautiful to see. I think there is a fascination that we still have of this idea that like plants will take over if we're not there.
Yeah. Well, and I know that in India too, there's a lot of temples like that as well.
Yeah, it might be. I have actually not been that much to that part of the world, so I'm not very knowledgeable on that.
I haven't been there either, but I want to too. Something you touched on earlier that I want to go back to real quick because you're talking about school in Italy, and I've talked to other people on the show about school in Europe in general, like in Sweden, for example, and the interdisciplinary aspect. And I thought yours was really interesting too, how you pursued so many subjects, and up until 19 too, because we do it up until 18 here. And one of the reasons why it interests me is I'm trying to create this new education system, especially for people like us of our age who want to pivot or do something new or learn lifelong learning, so to speak. Have a system for lifelong learning instead of just picking up a book and calling it a day. And I think that studying models like that of like how school has been made at other places around the world is really important.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I obviously only have that one schooling experience, so I can speak for, that. But for a person like me that really enjoys multiple things, it was so stimulating every day to learn about all these things. And it was also very interesting because the way the school system is organized is in a way that you can have a global understanding. So, for instance, if you are studying the 18th century, let's say, in history, at the same time, you'll be studying the 18th century philosophical movements, and at the same time, you'll be studying the art history of that time in your different subjects. So they are all sort of aligned. And even, for instance, in physics, you might be studying the concepts that started out at that time. So there is, and there is this way of going chronologically through the system that really allows you to get a really good big picture of what was going on and what the whole system and situation was overall, both within sort of the actual history facts, but also you get an insight into how all these subjects evolved through time. And something that I
Yeah.
absolutely missed is that we don't do music in high school. So
What?
we do that in middle school, but not in high school, or at least not in the scientific high school that I did. So I absolutely miss, like, I have what I know about the history of music is my own sort of research and something I absolutely don't have enough of and wish to like broaden.
Yeah. Well, I think there's been a few people on this show too that have pursued music deeply, so we can probably talk to them and maybe that'll help you. And it makes me wish, like, if I ever come up with time travel, I'm going to go back in time when I'm like, I'll go back to my teenage consciousness and move to Italy and go to high school there because our school is so fragmented. Like, all these different subjects are fragmented and separate when in actuality, like you said, they're much more connected. Having the art history mixed with also this physics of the time too is interesting as well.
It is. I have to say, it is also very intense. So high school, so failing a year is not uncommon. So it is a very intense and like you need to really be on top of things. But and you absolutely need good teachers because of course, like I think so much of how successful you are in school is up to how good your teachers are and how good your support system is. So if the
Definitely.
teachers are those people that really can get you excited about what they teach you, it really makes a huge difference in how well you will do and how much you will want to learn and how interested you will be in the subject. And I was very lucky in this regard.
Teachers make a world of difference. And something I want to ask you too, the other major aspect of your life is ballet. So how has it been for you training since you were 5?
So obviously it all started like, many sports start. Your mom takes you there. They see
Yeah.
that you like dance at home, so they just take you to a ballet school, and you start training, and you end up loving it, and you just end up not being able to live without it. And I have tried; it's not possible. I have given up ballet for a few months during the beginning of university, and that was the stupidest thing I could have ever done. It literally is something that I cannot go without. It's something that really gives me the possibility to express myself, but also in a similar way to the science, I love to sort of be able to express something, a concept, and that often ends up being a character. So the part that I like most about ballet is probably the pieces that are more like the storytelling. So rather than those ballets that are just choreographed on the music, they have definitely a lot of emotion, but you're not playing a character, you're not playing a role in almost an acting kind of sense. I really enjoy those a lot more. So being able to convey the story of the feelings of a specific person is really something that in ballet that makes it a lot more fun and a lot more interesting to me. But of course, moving with the music and all of that is also
The more
absolutely necessary.
improvisation, so to speak.
No, not necessarily. I quite like set choreography personally. It makes it a bit easier, especially because I'm so classically trained and we are tend to very used to this. But in big ballets, for instance, the Sleeping Beauty that was choreographed by Petipa, there you are playing a character. So when you play Princess Florine, you're playing a fairy that is a bird-like fairy. So you are having all these bird movements, or especially in more recent, relatively speaking, something like Romeo and Juliet, you actually get to play, for instance, Juliet, and that is there is the whole emotion that goes through, gets expressed in a different language instead of being expressed through I don't know, singing for opera or through speaking for theater. It is expressed as a dance. So you are dancing the character, you're dancing the scenes, you're dancing the pas de deux, or if you just play the peasant, like the peasant in the field of around the main characters, that is also very exciting to me.
Yeah. Well, the whole performance too, having everybody on there, I think is like as an audience member, just seeing everybody move in any way they need to, what to express themselves, I think is really interesting. And I remember seeing the Nutcracker of all things, and just seeing this various people, even like the people who were on the sidelines, were super interesting to me. And I look over to the side and see how they were moving, and then see the main character, and then see the people behind them. And I just thought it's so fascinating too. And you were mentioning how you can't live without ballet. And I think the same thing is for me with swimming. Like I don't think I'm ever going to be not around a pool in my life at some point, or teaching people how to swim or something like that. And it's a thing that when you went into university, it's a whole new world for you. It's a whole new challenge, and you almost need that consistency of your old like habits and systems to keep you going strong through it in a way.
Oh, absolutely, and I think something that I also really need is so you can pursue ballet even just as training. So there are two aspects to ballet. There is obviously the technical training aspects, and then there is the more artistic side and the actual, interpreting a character, dancing. Usually, I really enjoy dancing repertoire or dancing newly choreographed pieces, and the possibility you can survive on just the ballet training if you have to, and it's probably what I am mostly doing now because lack of
Yeah,
possibilities.
people.
But
Yeah,
well, yeah, it would be lovely not to dance in my kitchen at some point.
yeah.
But of course, like what I really really realize that I need is that sort of performance and like learning the characters, learning to interpret. And it's something that you might be able to see also on the ballet pictures that I take for Instagram. There is something behind it. It's not just a pose. They're trying to say, at least give, I'm not sure what the word is. Let's see.
Essence of
Essence,
sorts.
yeah, some sort of, maybe if not a message, definitely some sort of like ambiance
Yeah.
of some sort.
The meaning behind it. And I remember a picture of you doing a ballerina pose over a computer and mentioning like Women's Day. It might have been the International Women's Day picture, something like that. But there was a certain femininity to it, but also a power to it. And I thought that was interesting.
I quite like playing, I really like powerful musics. So every time there is a choreography or something to a very powerful type of music, for my ballet nerds, think of a Romeo and Juliet family dance. I think it's called, where there are the music is really powerful, and the two families. There is not actually a lot of choreography to it. They usually just walk and like have very powerful walks on stage. There is not a lot of technical virtuosisms or anything, but it is just such a powerful scene and like powerful characters, powerful female characters, or something that I really enjoy.
I love that. And powerful music is just powerful in general. Like we keep saying powerful, but it's true. Like powerful music can really inspire you and do new things and help you think new ways. And even before this call today, before you came on, I was listening to epic music, which is kind of like those trailer music you would see in movie trailers. And just getting into that right mindset, like, okay, let's get excited because it's going to be a great conversation. You need to be in a hype mood. Let's go. And so that's what I often try to do, is just listen to music that's going to get me in a engaged mindset.
I mean, when I work and like I have to do repetitive tasks in the lab, there is nothing like putting on like some really like powerful music underneath, and just you feel really epic doing the easiest thing.
Yeah, just writing a blog post, sitting there listening to like the most motivational piece. I'll have to send you my playlist later. I think you'll enjoy. Well, and it's interesting too, because as a video gamer, a lot of soundtracks to video games, like movie soundtracks, often have a lot of essence to them as well. There's one particular track that's towards the end of a game where you don't even need to know anything about the game, but the actual music itself just has this, not ambiance is the right word, but progression, I guess you could say, that allows you to feel like in the moment. Even though I haven't played that game in years, literally like 5 years at this point, I can think about that moment and remember that feeling it gave me and have channel that feeling into the work I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely. There is nothing like music to even to change your mood when when I'm feeling down. Just putting on some music that has that can communicate to my brain the mood that I'd like to be in rather than the mood that I am in makes an incredible difference, especially in times like these where it's you often need a pick-me-up, let's put it that way.
I take it you're more extroverted, or?
I have been defined as an extrovert, yes.
Well, I'm more of an ambivert, so maybe you are too. It's one of those things, it's kind of a mix. But like, yeah, extroversion during the quarantine sucks because you can't talk to anybody. It's like my roommate doesn't count. Significant others don't really count as much because you get bored of them real quick. You need that social energy.
I mean, at the beginning, when I was able to go back to the lab and just see my colleagues, that was the peak
So
of for a week. It was so exciting. Yeah. And then I got bored of them too. And I was like, damn it.
Yes, no, I totally get you. I used to go to karaoke regularly, and seeing the people there just has that same excitement. And also, considering your life as being more physical and training constantly, how do you see the dynamic of both your worlds together? We kind of touched on that at the beginning, but...
Yes. So on the sort of physical thing, I mean, science can, especially the one that I do, can be quite physical in the sense that I am standing and running around the lab. I'm not really, I don't know, a computer scientist just sits. There are definitely the moments in which I need to write reports or like analyze my data that are at a computer, but the day-to-day is definitely more like in the lab doing things and carrying heavy objects sometimes. So there is definitely a physicality to both. Of course, like the ballet is top notch, completely different. I don't think the level of fitness you would have just by running around the lab would be quite even close. It's just something that I'm used to now. I just do both things. There is the time for the day that I work, that I am in the lab or analyzing my data, and the time of the day when I do my ballet class. And I've always been doing that, and it's something that I'll probably be doing till I cannot move anymore.
And that's what you would define as an ikigai. I don't know. Are you familiar?
No, I'm actually not.
Yeah, an ikigai is a Japanese concept for your reason for being. And so it's a combination of 4 different areas, so hopefully I can remember all of them. But the thing you enjoy the most, the thing the world needs, what you can get paid for, what you're good at. And so when you find the intersection of one of those, it could be your vocation. And you find the intersection of another one, it could be your passion. And you find the intersection of all of them, that is your ikigai. And it seems like having both of those 2 aspects of your life is becoming your ikigai.
Yeah, I'd say so. Based on what you described, I essentially need the 2. I need the 2 in my daily routine to feel like my day I accomplished something essentially, and it's also, it's just, if I don't do one of them, I miss one of them. So, and then of course there is some compartmentalization in the sense that on the weekends I'll dedicate more hours to the ballet, and there are some days during the week that maybe I'll just dedicate to work, depending on what the schedule is with experiments. But it comes back to the adaptability. You need to be flexible with your schedule as well, because luckily science is quite a flexible, or at least biology, the way what I do is quite a flexible subject. So you can get to organize your experiment, and you can get to organize your things around your life, and then your life around the experiments. I don't have to be at the office 9 to 5. I can be there for my experiment in the morning, then take a Pilates class, and then come back in the afternoon. It's absolutely not a problem if I'm organized. And it's similarly, I'm lucky to be in London, where ballet opportunities are a bit everywhere at any time.
No, that's interesting because the systematic thinker in me is very enamored by that concept of just the compartmentalization as well as just organizing your different times. Because again, like it comes down to focus. What can you focus on? And people often think that if you try to do more than one thing, you're losing focus. But if you have the skills and the actual adaptability, like you said, but also the way both of your lives work, they actually can be adaptable to each other. And so if you can actually have those things coming together, you can do it. But people don't realize that it's a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And often how you need to sort of take breaks. So you need to take breaks. You can't focus on one thing for the entire day. And for me, like taking a break from the part of the day with science equals doing ballet. Of course, they need those moments, as we all, of the day in which you take a break from both. But it's absolutely necessary. Like you have a meal, you relax,
Meditate.
do something else. Many things we all have we all need our breaks. Even like holidays, I think are very important. If like you need to have a week at some point in which you're off from both things, and you just need to recharge your batteries, especially if you sort of are a very focused and productive person, and it's really necessary to like not burn yourself out. That I think is true for everything.
Yeah. I don't remember, I couldn't find where this research is, but there was this idea of a write-off period, REIF, I think, or RT, something like that, write-off period, where at some point you need to just take a break and allow yourself to take that break. And so late last year, I was trying to catch up on releasing these interviews, and I was like 40 behind. I had recorded this so much last year that I just, once a week wasn't good enough. And so I decided, okay, screw it, let's try to do one a day. And I was basically doing one episode, releasing a day. So editing an hour and a half long episode or something like that, then like rendering and uploading and then promoting all on that same day. And at one point towards December, like a month and a half later or so, I realized, okay, I can't keep this up now because December is like my worst time of year. Wintertime doesn't work. I needed to take a break. And I let myself take a couple of weeks off. And I think it helped me. It saved me from going to burnout. And I think that's an important thing to mention.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like burnout is a real danger, especially if you're somebody that is very productive in one or multiple fields. And sometimes like your body will tell you when you are close, and that is the point in which you just need to say, okay, like when is the closest time that I can just take off and just focus on something else. And that sometimes for me is traveling or I mean going to see my partner that lives in a different country, which is not fun right now, but well.
Yeah.
So it is quite it is absolutely necessary to take breaks, and it's something that is very hard to do sometimes if you're somebody that really just wants to get things done and even enjoys it. Like you'll say, oh, but everything will crumble because I'm not being able to do this thing that I absolutely need to do. And it's really hard to tell yourself, no, you need a break. Like you really do.
Totally resonate with that. And it's interesting too, because you mentioned switching focus and like interleaving that focus, so to speak. And that's a concept I talked a lot about with that education endeavor I mentioned earlier, where at some points we need to switch between different areas in order to keep that focus going. I learned that from my first job as a lifeguard, where we're watching a pool, there's 3 zones in that pool, every 30 minutes we switch zones. Even though it's the same task, being in that new environment helps reset that focus meter, and you're starting to focus differently. And they keep a track of that, like neuroscience behind it, and allowing yourself to actually do the job effectively. And I think that with learning or work or life in general, interleaving between these areas is how you keep that energy going. It's kind of like resetting the batteries real quick, or like whatever you want as an analogy. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I really feel like that is sort of the center of what I do, really. It's just rather than losing focus, it's switching focus. So it really it allows you to focus for longer overall in the end. And
Yeah.
if obviously if that is what you want.
A point I want to make that even for specialists, I think it's important to do that. Like switch between your tasks and balance it out because you're just trying to focus on the same one for a long period of time. You're going to probably burn out. Maybe not burn out in the macro sense, but in the micro sense of that day. And you're not going to have enough energy to move on to the next task. Now, there is the concept of deep work and focusing for a couple hour period, but try not to go past that period because sometimes, and you have to have the endurance for that too. Some people don't, and then they try to do it and they burn out from it.
Absolutely. Like even just in science, like sometimes you're focusing on like a specific line of research or a particular experiment, and there is something that just you cannot get right. And sometimes you just need to realize that there's no point. You just cannot solve that in that moment. You need to switch focus, do another task, even just another, like a different experiment for a different aspect of your research, and then think back
Yeah.
at that, give it 1 hour, 2 days, whatever, depends on obviously what you're doing. And it will all be so much clearer because sometimes you just need to step away, like it, and have the big picture that you just can't have if you're so focused that you see every single little detail.
Well, and major scientists have talked about that too. Like Albert Einstein would go off into a lake, roll himself into the middle, and just simply lay down and stare at the sky. And that's how he reset himself. If he had a problem that he couldn't solve, he stepped away from it. When I was coding my new website, which I'm not much of a coder, so it's a difficult challenge for me. I know it enough to like actually physically do it, but I just wasn't good at it. I came across a lot of problems, and a lot of times I would just sit there and try to burn through. I was like, no, this is not working. Take a step back, go for a walk, go meditate, do something else, and try to relax and think about it. Let it go on the slow burner, as they say.
Absolutely. Yes.
Well, and this leads me into my next question pretty well. I actually found you via Merritt Moore, who I had on the podcast as well. You both have a deep passion for ballet and science. I love that. I find your lifestyle to be inspirational, and I'm curious, again, how you live your polymathic life. We touched on it in the past couple of questions, but I wanted to ask you, how do you live this divergent life?
It's hard to say. How do you live is a very broad question. So
Yeah.
it's hard to pinpoint. I mean, for sure, it's something that I require. I really need. Like if you talk to my colleagues, you will like in my PhD in my research day-to-day science life. They know that I need my ballet. So and at the same time, sometimes I'll be talking. I have a friend in ballet, and she is also a medical doctor, and we will be geeking out about immune systems between like practice sessions. It's definitely something that I carry everywhere, but that it's not something I choose to do. It's something I have to do. I have to be
Yeah.
polymathic. It's just how I was born. Even like I really enjoy, for instance, being surrounded by art, and that is something that I need regardless. So even when I moved between sort of dorms, I would bring some prints of like Van Gogh, for instance. So it's definitely it's hard to separate. And I mean, how I do it day to day is just managing my schedule. Really, it's being able to adapt to what is available, and it does take a lot of time to do. I definitely, when I first moved here, I definitely wasn't able to do this as well as I could do before the pandemic. So like 6 years after, knowing all my more possibilities and more things, and we all grow and the needs change as life goes on. I mean, I was definitely polymathic before when I wasn't in high school, and even as a child, I had so many interests. It's very hard to define how.
No, I think you did. I think you did a good job answering that question. It was a difficult question. You answered it well. And it makes me think, too, of this idea that polymathy is sometimes ingrained naturally. Like for people like us, or Leonardo da Vinci, or other people of that nature, like the multi-potentialites of the world, we are polymathic because it just feels right to us. My first job was a lifeguard, but I soon became a swim instructor, pool manager, water instructor, fitness attendant, all these different things in the same building quickly, like within a couple of years kind of thing. And I at one point held 6 to 8 positions at once. And that, like, the craziness of that was just ridiculous. I shouldn't have done that per se, but I love I love that craziness. I thrived in it. I thought it was engaging and fun. And I think that for you too, it's the same kind of mentality. I think that people can become polymaths even if they don't have that.
Oh,
But I think for people
absolutely.
like us, it's almost like required that we do.
Yeah. It just goes deeper somehow. It's not something I wouldn't be able to just focus on one thing. It's even like within my science, I can't just always think only about my project. I need to read about other projects. I need to, for instance, even just listen to what my colleagues have and what problems they. Sometimes the easiest way to solve a problem in science is to talk to another scientist that might not be doing the exact same thing or like something fairly similar, but like just talking about it and listening to them, it gives you so many ideas, it gives you so much. So I would not be able to just focus on one thing. It's just not possible.
Well, and something I want to touch on there too is talking to another scientist, for example. Biology and chemistry to me seem a lot of micro. There are definitely a lot of small aspects behind it. Granted, biology can be the entire planet. That can be pretty big too. I get that. Ecology is a very wide range, and the biology of ecology is very wide ranging. And like, I wonder what it'd be like for a plant scientist like yourself to talk to like an astrophysicist, or to talk to someone in, let's say, computer science, for example. Like, there would be some interesting cross sections of plant biology and computers. Like, I know that seems very like
No,
impossible to think about, but
absolutely.
I'm sure there's probably some relations there.
There is a lot of research. So my PhD supervisor is actually a physicist. So it's quite there is quite a lot going on that is cross section, and it often gets maybe less press, especially less general press. But there is so much that happens when you get communication between people that are in theory in separate fields of science. There, for instance, I was listening to a conference on Friday, yes, 2 days ago. Days start melting together at this point.
Yeah, it's just like together. Yeah, I totally understand
It's just
that.
like today is Sunday, yes. And were mostly physicists, and they were studying electric fields and cells, and there is just, and it's something that usually biologists don't look into because it's just not necessarily something that you're taught when you do a biology degree. And there is this whole field of like electrophysiology that is something that you wouldn't necessarily expect. So there is so much more cross section than we can imagine. Really, there is more than any of us have the potential to imagine, because the world is so
Yeah,
complex, and I'm really grateful that the world is complex. It's just so interesting.
it's exciting. Yeah. Well, I think we know what your next field's going to be. So, something I ask all my guests is, what is a polymath to you?
So that's another difficult question. So I had never heard of the word polymath before you essentially contacted me, and I think polymath is definitely something to do with having a lot of interests and pursuing those and just wanting to pursue those, and doing your best to really have deep knowledge and deep application of what you really love, and that is in multiple fields and sometimes cross sections of fields. I think this is what it is to me, and what it looks like in my life. It just really, there is, I cannot necessarily separate into little boxes my science and my ballet and like my love of art history, my love of traveling. They are somehow all connected overall, and I chose to pursue two of them, so plant biology in this case, and ballet at a deep enough level to be called professional in today's environment. But for instance, something that in the Renaissance, it was normal to be polymathic, right? Because obviously there was a lot less knowledge in a way, so you could store more of the available knowledge, but you also had to know that you
Or know
didn't know
everything?
things. Well, you couldn't know everything, but like you could be a lot more highly skilled, let's say, in more things using less storage, if we put it on a sort of database kind of level. And it was normal. It was, Leonardo da Vinci is obviously the most, common example. He was an architect, he was a painter. Some people say he was a sculptor. They apparently found
Yeah, he
something.
sculpted.
Yeah.
He sculpted. He designed the first smart city.
He
He
did so many
discovered
things.
ocular science, light physics.
So there is so much. What is a polymath to me? It's somebody who loves multiple things, has multiple interests, and tries to pursue them the best way he can in the moment and context that they have. I don't like to say that, like, to be a polymathic, you need to like this, you need to want to do this, or you need to have this level of knowledge. You can sort of be polymathic within sort of your own realm of possibility.
That's good. That's brilliant. And I think there's one thing that most people would agree that you need to be, you need to have or need to be, is a love of learning, like autodidactic. Yes. And that's like the one thing where like self-learners is almost another trait of polymathy. I think the definition goes like many learnings and many interests. And it's interesting too to think about. A lot of polymaths will think about, like Da Vinci, are from Italy. And considering your background, I thought that would be interesting to touch on this. Someone told me there's no word in Italian for polymath. Someone mentioned sprezzatura, and like in Portuguese, someone kind of created the idea of polymatica, which I think would fit finally with the Italian language too. But there's no actual word for it, which I thought was interesting.
No, and honestly, I never had come across the concept really either, because this was just so natural that I never thought it was a thing in a way. Like I never thought it was. I did realize that other people I know were not polymathic, but I never really thought of it as something that you could necessarily define. I always consider myself like somebody that has multiple interests and just pursues them all, and that was it. Sort of. I never realized that there was a word for it. And it's quite nice to maybe put the definitions on something.
Yeah. Well, and to have kind of like a thing to attach onto. So polymath, multipotentialite, multipotentiale, all these different words people like to attach on. It allows you to feel like you have an identity that people can understand. And that's one reason I like having a show, is that like people like you who come on who are polymathic, I get to help exemplify those traits and make you feel more acknowledged. Well, at least ideally is what I go for. But
for sure, it's working.
Hey, good. Well, and you mentioned about art in your house and having like just different prints of Van Gogh, and literally the only two posters I have left, because I had a few of various different kinds, so the two ones I have left is Starry Night by Van Gogh, and then a Doctor Who poster, which is modeled after his style of painting. So those are the only two posters I have left, and I thought that was really interesting.
I actually quite like Van Gogh. I know he's not an impressionist. He's definitely post-impressionistic in movement, sort of art style. But in a way, like the impressionists, he really manages with, like, let's say a few brushstrokes, he manages to capture the essence of the scene. So like he manages to give you an impression. That's where the word impressionist came from. So it gives you the impression and it gives you the idea. So this is what I see, this is what I feel, and I can communicate it with not as much detail, which is very different from what you see in other styles of painting. So for instance, the more allegorical things that Renaissance had, where there was so much meaning as well. So but it was definitely something you had to read. So it was like, oh, this figure symbolizes this other figure, which is also beautiful. I really enjoy both. I really enjoy a lot of types of art, but it's something about the impressionistic movement and some of the post-impressionists like Van Gogh is literally this capability of just give you the gist, give you the overall meaning and context of an image without necessarily breaking it down into every single detail. It's something that I like about how I like to remember things as well. And going back to sort of the Italian education system and how they try to give you the gist of the time period in all the subjects. So this idea of getting a broad idea of how things work, and then if you want, you explore the details of what you prefer and you like the most. This is some concept that I really enjoy, and I try to sort of apply to to my life. I really like all these things, but these, like the science and the ballet, are the things that at this time I really, really want to explore deeply.
That life philosophy, if you will. And it's interesting how Van Gogh was able to take that impressionist philosophy and imbue it into his work, but take a completely different approach and take
Absolutely.
that less detailed approach, but it still has the details there, just in a different way. And like when you look at the fire and Starry Night, there's only a couple colors there to really differentiate the different layers of fire, but you still have that beauty of a fire. Like if I saw real fire right there and his fire right there, I wouldn't be able to see much of a difference, despite the fact his is much more flat, obviously because of painting, but I mean like in the actual drawing, it's
No,
flat. And it's interesting too, just because one other little thing that I thought was interesting. I keep saying interesting, but Lego is coming out with a Starry Night Lego set, which I thought was just completely random topic, but I wanted to mention that because I thought that's super exciting. Like a little Lego set, you can build your own Starry Night.
but it's actually really cute. Quite exciting, to be honest, because again, like something that maybe it's more typical of the, my French accent is horrible, Pointillism movement. What the Lego, well, something that maybe Van Gogh was sort of leaning towards in a way, this sort of breaking down the colors, and some of the Impressionists were as well, and then the Pointillism did a lot more clearly by just using dots of single colors. And it's something that, in a way, Lego is doing, in the sense you're trying to break it down into colored bricks and build a painting from it. There is definitely something there.
Yeah, just kind of going on that real quick. I've always been playing with Lego since I was a young kid. It's one of the few things I kept from my childhood that I still have in my closet at home. And I think it's interesting that one of my biggest things was I was a big fan of Star Wars, and so my biggest thing I wanted to build was a spaceship. I wanted to build the most advanced that I could with the parts that I had. And when you will have that constraint, that's the word, when you have that constraint of creativity, you only have so many parts to use. And of course, if you get more, you get excited because you have a bigger constraint, or a less constraint, I mean. And it's interesting because I always tear it down, rebuild it, tear it down, rebuild it over and over again. And I thought that was just ridiculous, because like sometimes I'd build a brilliant set that I could never replace. I could never build that again, I don't think. And there was just certain innovations, like I made the doors move on their own or something like that. But just that constant urge to create something better, or express that artistic creativity, so to speak, and to do it with your hands. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, toys are very important, I think, as a child. Like, you need to, no, but like you really need them to grow and to express yourself. And like, I was somebody that played with all toys. I didn't really have gendered toys necessarily. Like, I had toys for both genders, and I think that really helped. Especially as a girl, I know a lot of women, unfortunately, are sort of told, "Oh, you can't do that because you're a woman." And I was lucky enough that I never had that from within my family, and I think that included things as simple as I played with dolls and toy cars. So it really does help, I think, to create a more equal society, and even just like your creativity and your sense of like what you like and what you want can sometimes come out already there. And if you're given that possibility to express yourself within when you're young, it will definitely help express yourself later on.
Well, and there's this interesting gender identity of, like, let's say, marketing. And so, for example, pink and blue. Those are common colors. People say boys are blue, girls are pink. But ironically, like in the 1800s, I'm pretty sure it was flipped, where pink was a bit more of a masculine color and blue was a more feminine color, especially like the baby blue. And yet now we have them flipped again, the other way. But in the 80s, for example, Nintendo, a very famous video game company, they would try to market their toys and obviously video game consoles to both genders. But at one point, they decided we only have enough in the marketing budget to market to one. Should we market the girls or should we market the boys? And again, like that aisle for girls is pink, has all the Barbies, has all the more like dolls and like that kind of toys that is only for girls. And then the boys had the Transformers and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and it was all blue. And they literally had to like look at one. It's like, okay, let's market to the boys. And they started marketing the Game Boy, which is universally acclaimed for all genders and all people to love. to boys. And that's how they did most of their marketing from 80s and 90s, is mainly to boys. And then sometimes to girls every once in a while. But ironically, gamers are of all genders, but there's actually like 49% are women, from what I understand now. And it's just ridiculous how they only targeted one, despite the fact toys and gaming and all these different kind of aspects of life can be applied to both. And should.
Absolutely. Like, it really, sometimes I don't really understand necessarily why, because of course, like, if you get both genders onto multiple things, you get to sort of both conventionally gendered toys. It will really make, like, it will create more rounded people overall, and possibly more polymathic people, if you are allowed to explore all of the different aspects. Then you are more likely, even in sort of then as an adult, to have multiple interests and to be able to go down the path that really best suits you, if you just want to go down one or a few. And that will overall improve society, because you will have more competent people going down and doing what they really love and enjoy. So it is slightly silly to gender things in a way. Overall, you're just shooting your foot.
Yeah, well, especially as a company who's trying to sell stuff too, sell it to as many people as you can. And it's, I don't think I've ever told anybody this before too, but I remember playing with dolls, or like being, I had a paternal instinct as a kid. I always loved being that kind of like father figure to like a doll, or like playing house with friends or something like that. And I would dress up the doll and feed it, and like, or play with a little kitchenette or something like that. And I remember doing it as a kid, and like, that's a girl thing to do, but it's not. It's a human thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I would play with toy cars sometimes, and I would play with science kits, and I would play with Barbies and dress up, which I also still enjoy dressing up. Like, there's nothing wrong with doing all of these things. We're all human. They're all human things to do. Whatever you really enjoy is what you should do. It's, as long as obviously it doesn't harm anybody else.
Yeah, true.
But let's put a boundary there.
Yeah. How are you getting yourself back into shape for new collaborations, considering the quarantine and all that?
So at the moment, it's really a focus on the physical shape, because that is the hardest thing to sort of maintain. And it's just literally trying to do the best I can with what I have. Of course, I don't have the space to jump. I miss jumping so much, if we want to speak about that. But hopefully we get to do some of that outside when the weather is, as the weather is improving. But it is mostly about sort of, for me, for instance, a lot of Pilates training helps, because as a dancer, I am very flexible. I am double jointed. So for me, keeping my strength is definitely harder than keeping my flexibility. The flexibility just stays. So trying to cross-train and do what I can of ballet train within my limited space is what I do, and just listening to music. And I'm not very good at improvisation. It's something I absolutely need to improve, but trying to put time in some of that is for sure what I do to keep myself going with like the ballet training, and just hoping that we can get back to it soon in a more serious setting. But in the other case, I get some time to focus a bit, spend a few more hours on my PhD, which we could maybe hopefully trade a bit in that balance after, and spend a bit more time on the ballet and a little bit less on the PhD later when things reopen.
It's all about balance. And I resonate with you when it comes to just keeping your physicality up during the quarantine. I'm a personal trainer, I'm a swim instructor, water risk instructor. I was constantly exercising before the quarantine. And my routine, my habits, my rituals for exercise revolved around my work. So when I would go work for an hour, I would go work out for an hour and a half or something like that. I had the capacity to go straight into the gym and go work out and then leave. But once quarantine hit, my building closed. And so I lost my avenue of doing so. Luckily, I resonate with ballet and Pilates a lot, because calisthenics is something I really love doing. It's that body weight exercise, because people don't, they underestimate how much you can really do with your body. And I think you, of all people, know this very well. There's so much power to it. There's so much endurance and beauty to it. David Goggins is a famous speaker, at least here, and he talks about how when you think you're done, like when you're physically done, like you can't do anymore, you're really only about 40% of the way done because you have so much more power underneath it. And just a quick example, at one point my goal was to do 300 push-ups in one workout, not straight, but just in one sitting. I don't care how long it takes me, just get it done. I did have a time limit though because I had to go teach, but I sat down there and my limit up to that point was 220, 240, and I had been doing these for years, so I had that endurance. But I got to 240, my arms were numb, I fell on my face 3 times at that point, and I couldn't get myself back up. Like I physically could not push anymore. And I told myself, I have like 15 minutes before I have to go teach. I'm not leaving here until I get this done. Like, you have to get this done. And I'm sure that you probably had a moment like that with ballet, which you could touch on in a second if you'd like. But like, I sat there, I was like, okay, I made the decision, I'm going to do this. And I activated the fight or flight response in my body. So the adrenaline kicked in. And I was able to push past that last 60 as if I just started over again. Because that adrenaline kicked past all the numbness that I had in my arms, which I thought was just so fascinating physically.
It is quite, yeah. It's so. I think for me at the moment, so for instance, the first 2 weeks of, the first 2 months of lockdown, I think I got myself into like peak shape because it was going to be short and I was going to make the most of it. I had the time. And then I think but a lot of people I spoke to, at least, it's sort of all like that motivation stopped. At one point, it just stopped. And it was just really hard. And now I'm, of course, not in as good a shape as I would be in normal times, in normal sort of non-pandemic times. But at certain point, I think the way to sort of restart training and sort of get back into it is also to say, it's okay, I'll be in the best shape that I can be now in these conditions. So you need to sometimes just sort of read your environment and say, do I need to be at peak shape right now? And the answer is no, I am not performing, right? So, and does it make me feel better to push so hard that I hurt myself? And the answer again is no. This is not practical, or it's not doing any good overall. I'm not necessarily getting in better shape, and I'm not necessarily enjoying myself. So it gets to that point in which you say, okay, so for right now, I will accept a slightly less peak performance because that's what I can do now and what is most practical and possible in these conditions. And then I can be recharged enough to really push once I can. And I think that is sort of a level of the acceptance that I myself really struggled to find, especially, and I had to discover in the past year. It was very hard to sort of say, okay, I have to not push as somebody that really likes to push the limits. But I think it's really necessary sometimes to say, this is what I can do now, and this is as good as it will get in this situation. And especially in this case, when you know that you just need to wait for things to reopen, and then you will be in peak shape. You'll start again. You'll be able to do all the jumps, all the turns that you want. I think that really, really is something that spoke to me this year.
Again, it kind of comes back down to that write-off period. You have to give yourself time. Like, hey, it's okay to not be in that shape. And I've been trying to tell my clients this. I'm a personal trainer. My life literally, and you know this as ballet, our life revolves around our physicality. And when that pandemic hit, we lost that in a way, even though we can technically do a lot of stuff at home. In fact, a lot of my workout revolves around body exercises that I could literally do in my office room. But even still, it screwed up my routine. It screwed up my habits. Like, my routine revolved around work. And when I lost that, I lost my habits. And that sucks, but you can build them back. And so it took me a couple of weeks to get back on a little bit of a track. And I still didn't get into nearly as the high level that I was doing before until a few months later on. And eventually my work opened back up, so I was able to do a little bit, but I was still kind of worried about the virus and I couldn't do much. But I've been trying to tell my clients that it's okay to lose progress. Everyone is dealing with this. Everyone had to get back into the new habits and get back into exercise and back into their groove. And it took me 2 weeks to do so. It took you for however long to do so too. And we're used to it more than most people. So imagine what it's like for someone who's not as much used to it. And so that level of empathy allowed me to help get people back on track quicker.
Yeah, for sure. It's just it is sometimes really hard to accept, especially when you're somebody that has been always pushing and like always just expected. Well, not necessarily because of you expect yourself to be sort of at your peak performance all the time, and sometimes that is not possible, and it's not your fault, and it's very hard to accept. And it, sometimes you just need the excitement of a new collaboration to push you. So I definitely have gained some of my strength back since I planned some collaborations. I definitely was more motivated and tried maybe some things that I would not have wanted to try within my limited space. So it does
Yeah.
sometimes just require a bit of external motivation.
Like, I want to learn the essence of ballet if I can. So I think it's really interesting talking to you
I
about it.
saw this picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger doing some a ballet bar to like apparently he took a few lessons to sort of improve his bodybuilding form. I was just like, oh, I see. That sounds about right.
Yeah, well, you need that flexibility. You need that control. There's this. I know you know this, but I'm trying to explain it for the audience. There's just a certain level of power from ballet. People don't realize how much power it is. And as a personal trainer, there's 3 levels of exercise. You have that balance, strength, and power. And teaching your clients is always a balance of one of those 3. Usually, you start from the bottom and work your way up. But there are certain points where you need to work power. You need to just get that explosiveness, like your jumps. That's going to be explosive. You may be really good at it, but it's still an explosive movement. And then spinning is all about balance and control and having the strength to stay in that control. And I think that's really interesting as well. Or power to get faster too.
Yeah, there is definitely a lot. So ballet is a fairly complete type of sport, let's say. There is definitely a lot, like physically a lot going on. Like your body needs to be able to be flexible, to be strong, to be sort of ready. I'm not sure of all the technical terms because I did not study that, but there is definitely a lot like that goes on physically, and then you need to add the sort of theater layer on top, which is another thing. So as you do, one ballet step, there are so many things you need to think about. And I think that's one of the beauties of doing it. You need to be a bit of a polymath to do ballet, because you need to think of your body and you need to think of your shape, and then you need to think of what emotion is the music transmitting, and who am I playing? What is this character trying to say? There is just so much in one step. So it's really a lot.
Well, there's so many things I want to go off of there from that. First off, Arnold is really amazing because people see him as a bodybuilder, but he's so much more than that. And at one point, he was telling a story about when he was doing bench press, where he's pushing the weight all the way out. He would visualize in his mind how his muscles were developing. And one thing I found out when looking at the anatomy is that there's 3 different parts of the pectoral. There's one that's like diagonal, one that's kind of semi-diagonal, and one that's flat. Everyone always gets the flat and semi, but they never get up here. That's why there's a lot of not so much depth to this part. Like, it's always very sunken in, concave. And when you exercise that muscle, you need to go at the angle that's good for it. So you actually need to do a diagonal movement in order to activate that muscle properly. But people never think about that. And visualizing your muscles when you're doing the exercise, visualizing how you move, that is a mental game. That's not physical. It's combining those efforts. And a philosophy I've come up with over like learning from many other philosophies over the years is called the 4 pillars. You have the mind, body, spirit, and emotions. And you maintaining them is the course of your life. And understanding the balance between those is really key, especially for any kind of development in any of life. But I think for exercise, for example, incorporating the grit of your spirituality or like understanding your emotions. How is this exercise making you feel? Is the endorphins you're getting afterwards making you feel good? And that's why you do it. How are you visualizing and mentally doing the like counting of the reps or counting of the times you do it, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a lot that is not just doing the reps of the muscle to build the muscle. There is definitely a lot more about how like you feel the muscle, you visualize the muscle, and it really makes a difference in how you train. Even for ballet, often, for instance, for some movements, you need to visualize. Like they often tell you when you do rond de jambes, like think that you're in water. You need this resistance in the movement, and that really makes a huge difference when you look at students before they get taught that and after they get taught that. There is a really different quality to the movement, and it's really important, I think, really put your mind to the movements that you're doing, even if that is just just for training, if you're not sort of trying to perform or achieve a specific movement quality, it will make a difference. Even in Pilates, like being conscious of your breath, being conscious of which muscle you're meant to be contracting, it really makes a difference. You will really work out the muscle a lot more than if you're just doing the movement that you see without really thinking about it.
Well, in swimming, like 70% of all the teaching I do with swimming is literally getting people not to panic, which is all a mental thing. Granted, there's some physicality of it because when you get too much carbon dioxide, there's a physical response, and that causes that mental response. But the little trick that I always tell people, and I'll say this to you, I'll say it to the audience, but people often don't incorporate it as much: breathe out. Literally, that's all you have to do is breathe out. And you don't even need to breathe in. You can hold yourself on empty for a decent amount of time and feel comfortable. It's the level of carbon dioxide building up in your system that causes you to panic when you're swimming. And so when people have enough oxygen, they'll feel fine, but they'll also feel fine on empty too. And that's kind of like the secret there. Like 75% of people that I teach, I'll teach the basic movement, I'll teach them how to move, but then they panic. And so the real quest of me as a teacher is teaching them how to not panic mentally.
Yeah, that makes sense. I might need some of that for my swimming because I am not very good at that.
Well, and it's a skill that everyone has to do. And one of the next phases of PolyInnovator that I'm going to be doing is around this idea of polymath exercise, cross-disciplinary training between different areas. And it makes me really excited to talk to a ballerina like yourself to understand more ballet so I can incorporate that into that. So it'll be cool. And you performed ballet for much of your life. So what performance stands out to you most?
That's another very difficult question. So I think going back a bit to what we were saying, like if we think of thinking of sort of the performances I've done in sort of my adult life rather than my junior years, let's say, I think it's really hard to pinpoint something that's a performance that I enjoyed or liked the most. I really just like the variety in characters, especially when I get to perform variation, for instance. When I get to perform Kitri versus, which is sort of a Spanish dancer, versus Aurora, which is a Sleeping Beauty, very classical. There's just the difference between every role makes, and even just performing sort of the peasant in the background, it just is just so lovely to be able to switch your entire persona and to be able to express different things on different musics. So it's really hard to pinpoint. I definitely like my strong female characters, but I don't think I have necessarily one preference. Depending on my mood, I will watch different ballets. So for sure, sometimes if you're very sad, I love to watch Giselle. It's very sort of moody and sort of strong emotions. And if you feel more like celebratory, I'd say Sleeping Beauty is definitely more like pompous and there's a lot going on. Or like Kitri, I find Don Quixote is a lot more playful. There's all the love story and the characters tend to sort of play around. And it's very dynamic. It's a very dynamic type of ballet. So I just really enjoy the variety in roles. And I hope to be able to play even more in the future.
Definitely. And that's super exciting just to hear, too, the excitement you gave. When you're just sharing those ideas, you got more and more excited. And I thought that was awesome. Well, and pivoting a little bit, too, with the art and science, they belong together, as if you will. Without other, they can fail. And so, in order to reach the highest potential, they need each other. Are there many people that inspire you to bring both together?
So it's really hard to talk about inspiration because I think the concept for me is slightly foreign. So like I know that in the US you have this sort of idea of like you have an inspiration, a mentor, somebody that like really you want to follow and you sort of want to be like them, let's say. In Italy, that's not really a thing. So I'll admire, for instance, I don't know, Natalia Zipova for her she is an incredible dancer, and I'll admire some of my colleagues because they are incredible scientists, or I'll admire Rita Levi Montalcini, who is a very famous scientist, Italian scientist, for her science. But if I really had to say, is there a person that like I really want to be like? Maybe it's Leonardo da Vinci, not in the sense that it's like that I want to be an engineer and a painter, but like in the sense that like I really admire his lifestyle in a way, and it's probably just I just admire the ideal Renaissance lifestyle, in the sense, the polymathic aspect of it, and how much and how rich it was of different things and interests, and it's never boring.
You're a Renaissance woman.
A bit. Well,
Yeah.
I don't know if they would have liked somebody that does what I do, but as a woman in society at the time. But I guess yes, in a way.
Perhaps. There was some people around that time that were pretty powerful women, but yeah, definitely the sexism did not help. The question did ask though, like, is there any people that inspire you who do both, who do like art and science? So, is there any person that comes to mind who is polymathic, for example,
Well, I have to be
besides Da
honest.
Vinci, I guess?
I have to be honest. I think Merit Moore does inspire me quite a bit. I think she is incredible at what she does, and she really nails everything that she's trying to do. I think she's the sort of alive person that is quite inspirational to me.
Well, you're both brilliant, and I think that's awesome there too. You speak three languages, or two really well, two a little bit all right, I guess, from what you said. But I always find polyglots fascinating. So, what is your background with learning languages?
So let's say that I speak four languages. I'm fluent in English and Italian, and I can do some French and some German. Uh, and the funny thing being that I learned the four of them in four different ways. So I'm obviously a native Italian speaker. My parents are both Italian. I was born and raised in Italy. I sort of learned English when I was 5 by sort of direct learning. So I went to a British school, essentially, for my primary school, and that essentially I learned by induction. I was immersed in an English environment, and I had to. It was either you spoke English or you didn't. So and then obviously when I moved to the UK, it became even more fluent. And then German, I studied in school my teenage years, and I studied in that very sort of book focused type of language learning, and I haven't used it in a while, but I did realize that when I went to Switzerland, I could understand and say a couple things and get sort of my way around. So, but it was definitely a sort of book learning, studying the grammar, studying in school. And then French, I have been literally just adult full immersion with my partner's family, just like sort of, okay, let's do this. And
Let's try.
I have sort of, it's not very, very far from Italian. Like it is not definitely different, but like it's easier probably for me to learn to sort of grasp as I go. And it has somewhat worked for some things. So I have an odd background with languages, I need to be honest.
No, I think it's awesome. That's why I like asking that question too, because I have a weird background in languages. I think I don't know if I told you during the recording beforehand, but people don't understand my accent, and so people say like, is it Spanish or German? And it's because I grew up around Spanish speakers. My stepdad's Mexican, my biological father's part Mexican, although I didn't grow up with him. But I have Hispanic in me, and I have just Spanish around me. So and I took it in school too, and I also use Duolingo, which is a great app as well. So I had 3 different learning experiences there, like native immersion, school learning, like you said, with the textbook, and then with the app, which I would say comes a close second to immersion. Obviously, you still want to practice it, but it teaches you a lot. And I expanded beyond Spanish too. I tried French, and I tried Italian, Esperanto, and Esperanto is brilliant. I love it. But Italian was really fun, and I want to learn more of it. I think that's the next one I would want to learn more. And it's interesting too because I don't know a lick of Portuguese. Like I know a couple words. That's about it. And ironically, someone I know in the polymath space is Portuguese. Speaks Portuguese. He's not Portuguese. He's Brazilian. But it's interesting because whenever he made a post one day around polymathy, I was like, I really want to read this, and I didn't use Google Translate. I just knew the cognates from Spanish, French, and Italian that I knew, and I was able to pick up the words. Like there was words in Italian that I knew that I didn't know in Spanish, and I was able to pick it up over time just because of how close those languages are together.
Yeah, actually, it's something that is quite beautiful is to look at the evolution of languages. It's something that I have looked into, obviously, having studied Latin in school as well, because when in Italy if you do a type of high school that is called liceo in Italian, then you will have Latin. and you do it for 5 years, so it's quite intense. And then some, what you do talk about in Latin class as well is how the languages evolved from Indo-European originally, and then they broke into Latin languages and Anglo-Saxon languages, and then even like how German differs from English in that it had two changes in consonant sounds rather than just one, how English had. So it's so fascinating how you can sort of, in a similar way to biology, you can sort of break it down to like the original point to the best of our ability, obviously. But it definitely, the sort of tree of languages is really fascinating. Something that I might like to look
Definitely.
at in the future.
Well, and with your extensive Latin background too, I'm sure that learning Latin languages could probably just look at the Latin form and see how it might translate to there too.
That absolutely helps, I have to be honest. It really does.
You can answer this question for me here. One of my previous guests said that Latin originated from Sanskrit in a way, like if you go far enough back. Do you know anything about that? Is that, like you said, Indo-European, so I didn't know what that would be technically.
It might be. I have not sort of gone down that route enough. I remember we in our school textbook it called it Indo-European because it says that essentially it said that essentially most Indian and in European and sort of Asian, some part of not Asian, sorry, Middle Eastern languages come from a similar root. But then I cannot confirm how accurate that might be because we're talking my memory going 10 years more back. So
Well, and we're also assuming that that textbook was fully correct too. Like, I
exactly.
don't know how textbooks are over there, but textbooks over in the U.S. I feel like need to be abolished because they're just horribly
Well, I
incorrect a lot of
mean,
the time, or biased.
the more you go on in a field, the more you realize how biased and how poor your high school textbook was. So, you know, it's probably if I open my high school biology textbook, there are several things I might disagree with. So, yeah, again, like I'll leave it to the expert to, you know, actually clarify that because I'm not 100% sure of what I'm saying. And
No, you're good. I just figured I'd ask. And so this is a random question, but something I saw on one of your profiles is plant gravitorism. And I was wondering if you could explain that in your words, perhaps a really cool example too, if you know one.
So, okay, plant gravitropism essentially means how plants sense gravity. So essentially plants can tell which direction gravity is going, because if you grow a plant on the space station where there's no real enough gravitational pull, it will grow all messed up. You won't have the roots down and the leaves up. So the plant can tell which way gravity is, and there are some papers that try to explain. We don't have the full molecular pathway yet, but the nicest experiment that you can do is if you have a seedling, so a fairly young plant that has just one root and the two cotyledons, and you grow it on a vertical plate. So you literally imagine it looks like a plate, which has a gel on it, which is gel media. It has nutrients. So it grows like this. And if you then move the plate, you flip it at 90 degrees, after a while, the root will do that, will start growing like that. And that it tells you that the plant can sense gravity, and the root grows towards gravity. Meanwhile, the shoot grows away from gravity. So we know that this is a mechanism that it exists and works. And we know some of the molecular biology behind it, but it's not fully broken down as far as I know.
Yeah, no, that's a brilliant way to answer the question. And it's interesting because I know that humans have a sense of gravity too. It's like we have like 21 senses and whatnot, and one of them is the sense of gravity. And it's just interesting to think about how plants have that too, and how connected we are because of that. And like think about if a planet has more gravity or less, and how might a plant evolve that way too.
Oh, absolutely. And all the issues about sort of microgravity and how you want to grow plants on like space station. There's sort of several strategy going on, I know, to develop ways to, for sort of long-term space travel because we don't have curvature velocity, or what they call it in Star Trek, I think, which I really love too much. But the idea of like growing your own food on space station and how you can grow crops, it's quite complicated because of microgravity and these issues as well. The plant that is not happy in this environment because, of course, it was selected for, a very long time to grow on Earth in Earth conditions. But it is quite interesting how different senses then can go through similar or different molecular pathways depending between different organisms. I don't have an example right now. I can't really think of one, but there is this issue: is it convergent evolution or is it actually a common ancestor thing? Which is, what more people that specialize in phylogeny are just there to break down this. So, like, why do we? So dragonflies have wings and birds have wings, but they are convergent evolution. They're completely different structures, right? So this sort of thing. So I don't know if our sense of gravity has anything to do. I don't think it has absolutely nothing to do with the way the plants sense gravity.
Right. Well, and that makes a lot of sense. And I just wonder what the difference would be. And it also made me think, like, human agriculture. We change plants over our time. I wonder if that would do the same thing in space too. Granted, obviously changing places on Earth is way different than changing to no gravity at all. But if we have the history of it, maybe we can try to figure it out.
Of course, like, it depends a lot. So you need to enable evolution. So something that we do often now in agriculture is using batches of cloned seeds in a way, so that you don't get the plant to adapt and needs to be able to reproduce in that environment, right? So if you just cut off all the seeds and get the same batch of seed which is genetically identical and just keep sowing that, there's not going to be any evolution because you're not allowing the reproduction in the area and the selection of genes. There could be some sort of other background things going on, but it's not going to allow necessarily evolution per se. So it depends on how you do it, but you could definitely try and select a plant that likes space.
Yeah, it's a good idea. And you mentioned Star Trek, so this actually leads to this question perfectly. Is there any plants or plant ecology from science fiction or mythology that you wish were real?
So as a decent sci-fi fan, there are two things that I love and I wish were real. So one is the Avatar Pandora ecosystem. It's one of the most beautiful things. And the other one is from Star Trek Discovery. They talk about astromycology and like this mycelial network of fungi in space that absolutely cannot exist, but it's so amazing. I just when that came out, I was geeking out so bad. I was there like, oh yes, fungi.
Well, and it's interesting. There's a video game called The Last of Us where it's a zombie game, but the zombies come from a fungi that came about and basically infected people and whatnot. And it's just interesting how, like, it was similar to the fungi that infects like ants and takes over them and treats them like a zombie and whatnot. I thought it was like super interesting how it just like completely expanded upon that one plant and made it a whole story.
Oh, absolutely. And fungi are another sort of. So I work on a plant pathogen that is not a fungus, but it's fungal-like. And like, I can assure you, fungi are another of those extremely crazy, interesting worlds that we don't think about. And it's just, there is just so much evolution and so many things that they do, like just under the soil where we don't see them. Yeah, mycology is something else that, I'll leave you with this, that like we are actually more closely related to fungi than we are to plants. So that is so the tree of life splits, right? It splits with plants, and then it splits fungi and animals.
That's interesting, and that actually leads to the next question too. What does the tree of life mean to you?
Well, so the tree of life, as for the scientific concept of it, so the fact that we can somehow, mostly with genetics right now, but like they do also some other types of taxonomy, we can sort of go back and sort of say that all life came from like some ancestral life form, or like there are various theories on this. Obviously we can't properly go back and test it because that requires a time machine, but it's beautiful to think that all life on Earth is interconnected, and we have proof of that. So it's even like, we need to love this planet and climate change and all of that. We need to really take care because like it's all very, like, we all come from the same thing, and we also we're very diverse, and we all need each other to avoid extinction level events and like conserve the ecosystem and everything. So this is a more sort of obviously the purely scientific aspect is that you can just go back and kind of assume what some of the early life forms might have been like somewhat. But it is very fascinating to me that everything is interconnected, and in the same way, like if everything on the planet is interconnected, almost everything has the same genetic code. Like, how are different subjects created by humans not interconnected? It goes back to the Polymathy thing. Like, those are just things that we made up. They are absolutely connected.
Social constructs and whatnot.
Absolutely.
Well, pivoting to one last question here. You're in the midst of your 2 careers now. Obviously, the pandemic changed a lot of things, but what do you think will come next for you?
That is very hard to say. So the real answer is I don't know. I have sort of always gone along with my interest, which is something that, given the possibility, I recommend to everybody. Don't sort of like decide I want to be this in the future. Like, go along within sort of the limits of your possibilities, but like go along with what you like and what you want to do. And I cannot say whether after my PhD is finished, I'm going to be doing a postdoc or I'm going to be dancing for a company. I don't know. I hope I can do both. We shall see. I mean, or maybe I'm going to be doing something completely different. I cannot...
content creation or something.
I cannot predict. But I like to leave doors open. I think that's the best.
Yeah, definitely. And considering doors open, where could people find you online if they wanted to know more?
So I think the easiest place to find me and the place where I'm the most active is Instagram. So that's at Eleonora Moratto. And I'm also on Twitter, but less active on Twitter. Same handle. I think those are my main 2 social media platforms.
I have the links in the description for you there. And what could be like a call to action for the audience to do?
Do what you like. I think that's the reality is, like, if you like something, pursue it and just go down that rabbit hole and go down multiple rabbit holes at the same time. If you have the time, if you like it, just do it. That's really what I think is the best take home message. If you take anything home from what I said, is just do what you like. You will definitely find it more satisfying and fulfilling to do what you like rather than and you'll make something out of it rather than doing something else because it's right, or, well, I mean, try to, be conscious, but of course, but like, or because somebody else says that, like, oh, you need to, be a doctor because doctors have a good are set for life, right? And just like, if that's not what you want to do, you're not going to have a happy life.
Yeah. Well, they have a whole suitcase of things to take home with themselves today, so thank you. Once again, that's the Miller PolyInnovator and Eleonora Moratto on the Polymath podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.